Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The gray sky hung low over a small college town in Texas, rain sliding down the windows like silver threads. Mark Davis walked fast, his shoes splashing through puddles as he adjusted the strap of his worn backpack. At 23, he was juggling law school, a part-time job, and the heavy weight of his late father's debts. The world seemed to press on his shoulders with every unpaid bill. He had a sick mother at home, a sister whose tuition depended on him, and a future that felt like it was slipping through his fingers. His phone buzzed. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks," said a calm, older woman's voice. "I would like to meet with you tonight. It concerns your financial situation." Mark stopped in the rain, confused. "I am sorry, who are you?" The line went silent for a moment before she replied, "You will understand soon." Brooks Bistro, 7 p.m., and the call ended. Hours later, Mark entered the quiet restaurant, shaking rain from his hair. The warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the storm outside. At a corner table sat a woman in her 70s, silver hair styled perfectly, pearls around her neck, posture straight and confident. She looked like the kind of person who owned the place. "Mark Davis," she greeted, gesturing for him to sit. Her tone was calm, almost commanding. "Mrs. Brooks?" he asked, still unsure. She nodded. "I know about your debts. The ones your father left. I know you are barely making rent, and I know about your mother's treatment." Mark froze, his throat tightening. "How do you know all this?" "It does not matter," she said smoothly. "What matters is that I can help you. I have a proposal." She took a sip of tea, eyes never leaving his. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy. Mark blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she continued. "This is not about love. It is a contract. In return, I will pay off your debts and secure your financial future." Mark laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking, but her expression did not change. "Why me?" "Because you are young, unattached, and desperate enough to say yes," she said plainly. "I need a husband for legal and personal reasons. You need a way out. Think of it as an arrangement." Mark shook his head, speechless. "I cannot do that. It is insane." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes sharp but not unkind. "Insane or necessary? Sometimes they are the same thing." She slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a legal contract. His name was already printed at the top. "I do not need your answer now," she said softly. "But do not take too long. Offers like this do not wait forever." As Mark stepped back into the cold rain that night, the world felt even heavier. The sound of thunder rolled across the sky, and for a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the folder in his hand. He could almost hear his mother's weak voice telling him to be strong. He could see his sister's hopeful eyes, waiting for him to come through. Somewhere deep inside, a thought began to grow: maybe the only way to save his family was to sacrifice himself. He tucked the folder into his backpack and walked home through the storm, unaware that one decision was about to change his life forever. The rain had not stopped by morning. Mark barely slept. The folder sat on his desk, its pages heavy with the promise and the shame of what it represented. He stared at it until the words blurred. His mother's faint cough echoed from the next room, pulling him back to reality. Her voice, tired but gentle, drifted down the narrow hallway. "Mark, are you leaving for class?" He forced a smile. "Soon, Mom." He poured her a cup of tea and sat beside her, the light from the window washing over her pale face. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes. You did not sleep again. Just thinking, he said softly. She smiled weakly. You have always carried too much on those shoulders. Whatever it is, we will be all right. He looked away, because she did not know how close they were to losing the house. That afternoon, he found himself back at Brooks' bistro. The same chair, the same silver-haired woman waiting with her tablet open. You came back, Eleanor said without looking up. I did, Mark replied, his voice steady. But I still do not understand why me. She finally looked at him, eyes sharp yet calm. Because I do not need affection, I need order. I am 71, Mr. Davis. My board wants to remove me from my own company unless I am legally married. They call it succession optics. I call it insurance. You are a solution. Mark exhaled slowly. And what if people find out? They will not, she said, tone absolute. We both sign a confidentiality clause. 6 months, then dissolution. You get your freedom, and I get my legacy protected. He leaned back, rain tapping softly on the window. 6 months, he repeated. Yes. And during that time, you will live in my estate. Appear at 5 public events. Speak when needed, smile when expected, and never fall in love with me. Her mouth curved faintly at the last line. Mark almost smiled despite himself. You are very confident, he said. I am very practical. She slid a pen toward him. Sign when you are ready. He hesitated. The pen felt heavier than it should. He thought of his mother's medicine bills, his sister's tuition, the final notice sitting unopened on his kitchen counter. Slowly, he signed. Eleanor closed the folder with quiet satisfaction. Congratulations, Mr. Davis. The ceremony will be in 1 week. 1 week later, Mark stood in a courthouse under flickering fluorescent lights. A notary read the vows, and before he could process what was happening, Eleanor slipped a gold ring onto his finger. You may call me Eleanor, she said softly as they stepped outside into the drizzle. Welcome to your new life. The black sedan waiting at the curb took them to her estate on the outskirts of the city. The gate was taller than any building he had ever lived near. Beyond it stretched manicured gardens, marble statues, and a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When the car stopped, a uniformed butler opened the door. Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Davis, he greeted with a bow. Mark followed Eleanor into a grand foyer lit by chandeliers. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished oak. You will have your own room, she said, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Dinner is at 7. Dress properly. Yes, ma'am, he replied automatically, then corrected himself when she looked back. Yes, Eleanor. Her lips twitched, almost approving. The room assigned to him was larger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed rain washing over the gardens. On the bed sat a single note written in elegant cursive, appearances are everything. Do not forget. As evening came, Mark found himself seated at the long dining table, its candles flickering in crystal holders. Eleanor sat at the opposite end, graceful and distant. A silent chef served roasted salmon and wine. They ate mostly in silence until she asked, Tell me, Mr. Davis, why law? Mark looked up. My father believed justice mattered. I guess I wanted to prove him right. A noble illusion, she said, eyes on her glass. You will learn soon that justice and money are rarely on the same side. He studied her across the table. Beneath the pearls and poise, there was something else, a loneliness she hid well. For a brief second, he wondered what had made her build walls so high. But when she lifted her gaze again, her expression was unreadable. Get some rest, Mark, she said softly. Tomorrow, your real education begins. As he walked back to his room, the echo of her words lingered like thunder in his chest. Somewhere in the distance, the rain began again, and for the first time, he realized the storm outside might not be the only one he had to face. Morning light poured through the wide windows of Mark's new room, touching the polished wood and gold-framed paintings. He woke to the sound of soft knocking. "Breakfast in the garden, Mr. Davis," said a housekeeper politely. Mark glanced at the clock. 8 o'clock sharp. He was still not used to the rhythm of this house, a place where time felt carved into marble. As he stepped outside, Eleanor sat beneath a canopy, reading the newspaper with a cup of tea. Her poise was unshakable, even in silence. "Good morning," Mark said, his voice unsure. "You are late," she replied without looking up. "I am sorry, I did not realize, in this world," she interrupted, "realization comes too late. You must always be ahead." Mark sat across from her, feeling like a student before a professor. "Today you will meet Mr. Sinclair," she continued, folding the paper neatly. "He manages my public relations. You will attend a luncheon with him and the charity board. Smile when you are introduced. Say little. Appear steady. That is your first lesson in wealth. Silence can be stronger than words." Mark nodded, memorizing every instruction. That afternoon, the limousine rolled into downtown Dallas, the streets a blur of motion and money. Inside the restaurant, Mark followed Eleanor through a crowd of executives and photographers. Mr. Sinclair, a tall man with silver hair, greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Brooks, a pleasure as always." His gaze shifted to Mark with polite curiosity. "And this must be your husband?" Eleanor's tone was calm. "Yes. Mr. Davis prefers to stay out of the spotlight." Cameras flashed. Mark managed a composed smile, his hand tightening on the glass of water before him. For the next hour, he watched Eleanor navigate every question with precision. When someone asked about their marriage, she laughed softly. Sometimes, companionship finds you in the most unexpected places. The crowd chuckled, satisfied. But when one of the board members leaned toward Mark and asked, "So, Mr. Davis, what line of work are you in?" Mark hesitated. Eleanor glanced at him, a silent cue. He straightened his back. "Law," he said evenly. "I am studying to become an attorney." The man nodded, impressed. The moment passed. Eleanor's eyes softened for the briefest second, then returned to steel. On the drive back, she finally spoke. "You did well. You did not embarrass me." Mark almost smiled. "That sounds like praise." "Do not mistake acknowledgement for affection," she replied. Yet beneath her tone, there was something almost human. Over the next few weeks, their strange partnership became a quiet routine. She attended board meetings, he shadowed her public events, and at night they dined across that long table, saying little but noticing much. Mark began to see how carefully she lived, every movement deliberate, every sentence measured. She was alone, surrounded by people who obeyed but never cared. One evening, as they prepared for a gala at the City Museum, Eleanor entered the room wearing a silver gown that shimmered under the chandelier. Mark froze for a heartbeat. She caught his stare. "Do not look at me like that," she said coolly. "It ruins the illusion." "What illusion?" "That I am untouchable." The car ride to the gala was silent. Reporters crowded the entrance, flashes slicing through the night. Eleanor took his arm as they stepped out, her grip light but firm. "Smile," she whispered. Inside, the event unfolded in elegance and whispered envy. Business leaders congratulated Eleanor on her new marriage. Mark stood beside her, feeling the weight of eyes and expectation. Then came the test. A woman in her 40s, clearly from Eleanor's past, approached with a smirk. "My, Eleanor, you never mentioned your husband was so young. Did you adopt him?" Laughter rippled nearby. Mark felt his stomach twist. Eleanor's face did not change, but her grip on his arm tightened. Before he could think, he smiled politely. "She might not have adopted me," he said evenly, "but she certainly rescued me from something far worse, mediocrity." The table went quiet. Then someone laughed. The tension broke. Even Eleanor's lips curved faintly before she turned to the woman. "As you can see," she said, "I have excellent taste." Later that night, in the car, Eleanor looked out the window as the city lights blurred by. "You should not have interfered," she said. "You handled it," Mark replied. "But I could not let her humiliate you." For the first time, Eleanor looked at him not as an employee but as a person. "Careful, Mark. Empathy is dangerous in this world." "So is pride," he said quietly. The car fell silent again, but the air between them had shifted. When they reached the estate, she paused before going upstairs. "Good night, Mr. Davis." "Good night, Eleanor." After she disappeared down the hall, Mark stood in the vast foyer alone, the echo of laughter still ringing in his ears. For the first time, he realized this arrangement was becoming something neither of them had planned. The following weeks moved like a quiet storm. Every morning began with the same routine: Eleanor reading the newspaper by the window, Mark waiting for instructions, and the house running like a machine of silence. Yet something had changed since the gala. She no longer called him Mr. Davis when they were alone. Sometimes, she simply said his name. That small difference echoed louder than any word of affection. One evening, Eleanor summoned him to her study. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow. "Sit," she said, closing a file. "You have done well these past weeks. The board has stopped asking questions. Our arrangement is working." Mark nodded, but she could tell he was uneasy. "Something troubles you?" she asked. "You make it sound like a report, not a life," he said quietly. She leaned back, studying him. "You signed a contract, Mark." Feelings were not part of it. "Maybe that is the problem," he said before he could stop himself. Eleanor's eyes flickered, a flash of surprise breaking through her calm. "Do not confuse gratitude with emotion," she said, her tone soft but firm. "You saved me," he replied. "From what?" she challenged. "From drowning," he said. "Even if it is in debt, in despair, in hopelessness, you gave me a way out." She looked away, pretending to adjust the fire, but her silence said more than her words. Days later, they attended another event, a charity auction for a children's hospital. Eleanor stood center stage, confident as ever, while Mark observed from the edge of the crowd. When the host announced a surprise painting donation, Eleanor turned to Mark. "You will bid," she whispered. "Publicly." "Bid? With what money?" he whispered back. "Use mine. Just do it gracefully." As he raised his hand, cameras flashed. The auctioneer's hammer fell. The painting was his, technically hers, but the applause that followed was real. For the first time, Eleanor smiled openly, almost proud. That night, back at the mansion, Mark placed the painting in her gallery room. It was a portrait of a young girl holding a violin, her eyes bright with innocence. "It reminds me of someone," he said. "Of who?" "Of who you might have been," he said softly. Eleanor stood beside him, staring at the painting. "My sister," she said finally. "She died when we were children. I have not spoken her name in decades." Her voice trembled on the edge of memory. Mark turned toward her, his voice gentle. "You built everything to protect yourself from feeling that loss again." She looked at him, eyes sharp, yet wounded. "You think you know me, Mark, but you do not." "Then let me," he said. The silence stretched between them, heavy, intimate, and terrifying. She turned away first. "Go to bed, Mark." But as she left the room, her hand brushed his arm, a touch so brief it could have been a mistake, but it was not. The following morning, the estate felt lighter. The staff noticed. The usual cold commands softened. Even the butler dared a small smile. Yet the change drew attention from outside. That afternoon, Mr. Sinclair arrived unannounced. "Mrs. Brooks," he began carefully, "there are rumors." Some board members believe this marriage is unconventional. Eleanor's expression hardened. They can believe what they want. They are questioning your stability, Sinclair continued. They say your husband is influencing decisions. They have requested an internal audit. Mark froze, feeling the air drain from the room. Eleanor dismissed Sinclair with a wave, but the damage was done. That night, she sat alone in her study, staring at the fire again. Mark approached quietly. You heard him, she said without looking up. They want to strip me of my company. Then fight back, he said. You are stronger than they are. She smiled bitterly. Strength is not always enough. Power is built on perception, and mine is slipping. Mark stepped closer. Then let me help. How? She asked. By being seen, he said. By standing beside you as more than a symbol. Her eyes met his, uncertain. You are not trained for this world. Neither were you when you started, he replied. She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, You are dangerous, Mark. Not because of ambition but because you make me believe again. He did not know what to say. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence that words could not. She finally rose, her posture straight but her voice unsteady. Good night, she said, though she did not move to leave. The flames danced in her eyes, and for the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman remembering how to feel. As the clock struck midnight, Mark knew the contract that once bound them was slowly turning into something neither of them had expected or could control. Winter settled over Texas with cold rain and long nights. The mansion, once filled with quiet order, now carried a different rhythm, one of unspoken tension and fragile connection. Eleanor spent most of her days at the company headquarters, while Mark studied case files in the library, preparing for his bar exams. Yet every evening, they somehow ended up in the same room, sharing dinner and silence that no longer felt empty. One night, the silence broke. The audit begins tomorrow, she said without lifting her eyes from her plate. They will look into every contract, every signature, every rumor. Mark put down his fork. And what happens if they find something? They will try to remove me, she said simply. My name has built Brooks Industries for 40 years. Now they want to erase it. He looked at her across the table, the candlelight catching the faint tremor in her hands. Then let them see who you really are, he said. A woman who built everything from nothing. She smiled faintly. The world prefers stories of men who save women, not the other way around. Then let us give them a new story, he said. For the first time, she met his gaze without the armor of control. The next day, Eleanor faced the boardroom. Cameras clicked. The audit committee questioned her decisions, her marriage, even her sanity. Mark sat beside her, his jaw set. When one of the directors sneered, a 71-year-old CEO marrying a 23-year-old student, how convenient, Eleanor stayed calm. Convenience has never built an empire, she replied. Discipline has. Vision has. And if any of you had the courage to lead instead of gossip, you might understand that. The room fell silent. Mark felt pride burn in his chest. After the meeting, he caught up to her in the hallway. You were brilliant, he said. You spoke like someone who had nothing to prove. She stopped walking. Because I do not. He smiled. You still look like you won. Winning is temporary, she said softly. Survival is the real art. That evening, she invited him to her private terrace, place he had never been. The city lights glittered below like fallen stars. She poured 2 glasses of wine, handing him one. I have not been up here with anyone in years, she admitted. You make solitude seem less heavy. Maybe it was never solitude, he said gently. Maybe it was waiting. She looked at him, searching for the right reply, but the words caught in her throat. Mark, she began, but he stepped closer. Eleanor, he interrupted, I know this started as an agreement. But somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. She closed her eyes, the wind tugging at her hair. Do not say it, she whispered. You will ruin everything. Or maybe, he said, I will finally make it real. Her breath trembled as he reached for her hand. For a long moment, she did not pull away. Then she turned, her voice breaking. I cannot afford to feel. You do not understand what it costs. Then let me share the cost, he said quietly. She stepped back, shaking her head, tears glimmering but never falling. You have no idea what you are offering. Then teach me, he said. She looked at him, torn between fear and desire, before walking past him toward the door. Good night, Mark, she said, though her voice was softer than it had ever been. The following week, the audit results leaked. A tabloid headline screamed across the internet, the contract marriage scandal, was it all a lie? Reporters flooded the estate gates. Camera flashes pierced the night. Eleanor locked herself in her study, refusing calls, refusing help. Mark stood outside her door, knocking. Eleanor, please let me in, he said. You cannot face this alone. I have faced worse, she called back. I told you not to get attached. I am already attached, he said, his voice cracking. The door opened slowly. Her eyes were red but her voice was steady. They want a spectacle, she said. Tomorrow there will be a press conference. You will stand beside me. You will say nothing. Do you understand? He nodded. If standing beside you is all I can do, then I will do it. The next day, under the blinding lights of reporters, Eleanor Brooks stepped to the podium. Yes, she said clearly, our marriage began as an arrangement. But what began as necessity has become something else. I will not apologize for finding companionship where I least expected it. I will not let your cynicism define my life. Cameras flashed. The crowd erupted in questions. Mark stood behind her, silent, watching her reclaim her name. In that moment, he knew the contract had ended but their story had just begun. The press conference changed everything. For days, the media could not stop talking about the scandal or the woman who had stood in front of the cameras and refused to hide. But behind the headlines, the world inside the mansion grew quieter. Eleanor spent long hours in her study, reading letters from shareholders and ignoring calls from the board. Mark tried to stay out of the way, but the silence between them had become unbearable. One evening, he found her standing on the balcony, looking out over the rain-soaked city. You should not be out here, he said softly. You will catch a cold. I am not made of glass, she replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. You should not be here either. This is not your fight. It became mine the moment I signed that contract, he said. She turned to him, her face unreadable. You think loyalty can save me? You are young, Mark. You still believe the world rewards good intentions. And you stopped believing it, he said quietly. Maybe that is why you needed me. She looked away, her lips tightening. What I need, she said, is for this storm to pass. Days turned into weeks, and the board's vote finally came. Eleanor kept her composure as the directors announced their decision. She would step down as CEO but remain chairwoman in name only. The empire she had built, the company that carried her name, now belonged to others. After the meeting, she walked out without a word, her heels clicking against the marble floor like fading thunder. Mark followed her to the car, but she stopped him with a raised hand. Do not, Mark. I need time. Time for what? He asked. To remember who I am without all of this. For 2 days, she locked herself in her room. The staff whispered. The phone rang constantly. On the 3rd day, Mark knocked once more. Eleanor, he said through the door, I know you do not want to see anyone. But there is something you should know. The door opened slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. What is it? He held out a letter. Your sister's painting. The one from the charity auction. It was sold anonymously again, to a foundation under your company's name. They are opening a children's music program in her memory. Eleanor stared at him. Who authorized that? You did, he said quietly. Weeks ago. You just forgot. Her eyes glistened. Then even when I was fighting, I was still creating something good. You always were, he said. You just stopped seeing it. For the first time, she let him hold her. It was not romantic. It was human, two people exhausted by the weight of the world. When she finally pulled away, her voice was steady. Mark, I cannot give you what you want. I never asked for anything, he said. Yes, you did, she said softly. You asked me to feel again. And I did. That is the problem. She walked to the window. Tomorrow I will leave for Europe. I need distance, and you need a life that does not revolve around me. You do not have to run, he said. This is not running, she replied. This is survival. The next morning, her car waited at the gate. The staff lined the driveway in quiet respect. Mark stood by the steps, rain dripping from the eaves. She walked toward him, dressed in gray, elegant as ever. Take care of yourself, she said. And finish that law degree. The world needs more people who still believe in justice. And what about you? He asked. What do you need? She smiled faintly. To stop pretending I do not. She handed him an envelope. Inside was the original contract signed, stamped, and now marked void. Consider our agreement complete, she said. But if you ever decide to visit Paris, look for the woman who stopped believing and learned to start again. He could not speak. She stepped into the car, the door closing softly behind her. As the vehicle disappeared down the wet road, Mark stood in the rain, the envelope pressed to his chest. The mansion behind him felt emptier, but also lighter, as if something sacred had been released. Somewhere far ahead, he knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of whatever came after love. Months passed since Eleanor left for Europe. Spring returned to Texas, washing the city in color again, but for Mark, everything still felt gray. He finished law school, passed the bar exam, and began working at a small firm downtown, yet no victory felt complete. Every success reminded him of what he had lost. He still lived in the small apartment he once dreamed of escaping, but now it felt too quiet. Sometimes, when rain tapped against the window, he could almost hear her voice saying, "You will learn soon that justice and money are rarely on the same side." One morning, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Eleanor standing outside a music center in Paris, surrounded by smiling children. The plaque behind her read, "The Clara Brooks Foundation." Her sister's name. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note, "Do not stop believing." Mark closed his eyes, the edges of the paper trembling in his hands. She was gone, yet she had not vanished. She was living, rebuilding, healing. Inspired, he began volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping those who could not afford representation. For the first time in months, his purpose felt real again. Late one evening, while locking the office, his phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed across the screen. He answered. "Mr. Davis," a familiar voice said. His heart stopped. "Eleanor? It is late there, is it not?" she said softly. "I should have called sooner." He smiled through the quiet. "I thought you did not believe in phone calls." "I still do not," she said, a small laugh escaping her lips. "But I thought you should know the board offered me a position back. Not as CEO, but as a mentor. I accepted." "That is good news," he said, his voice warm. "They finally realized you are irreplaceable." "No one is irreplaceable," she said. "But I am learning that some people are unforgettable." There was a pause. "Mark, have you found what you were looking for?" "I found what you taught me to see," he said quietly. That kindness and integrity are not weaknesses. They are power. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "If you ever come to Paris, the invitation still stands." "Maybe I will," he said. "Maybe you should," she replied. "Good night, Mark." The line went dead, but her voice lingered in the air. He stood in the dark office, city lights flickering outside, and smiled. The world felt vast again, full of roads waiting to be taken. He slipped the letter into his coat pocket and whispered to himself, "Maybe the best contracts are the ones we never sign." The rain began outside, gentle and steady, the same way it had the day they first met. And somewhere across the ocean, a woman looked out her Paris window, smiling at the same sound, knowing that love, once real, never truly ends. 6 months later, Mark stepped off a train at Gare de Lyon, the cool Paris air wrapping around him like a quiet welcome. His firm had sent him to Europe for a conference, but deep down, he knew this trip was not about work. The letter from Eleanor still rested in his wallet, its edges worn from being unfolded too many times. He took a deep breath and followed the address she had once written at the bottom of the note. The Clara Brooks Foundation sat on a quiet street near the river, its glass doors framed by blooming lavender. Inside, the sound of children's laughter echoed down the hallways. A receptionist smiled politely. "Bonjour, monsieur. How may I help you?" "I am looking for Mrs. Eleanor Brooks," he said. The woman's eyes brightened with recognition. "Ah, Madam Brooks is in the music room. Please, this way." His heart thudded in his chest as he walked down the corridor. At the end of it, through an open doorway, he saw her. Eleanor stood among a circle of children, guiding a little girl's hands on the strings of a violin. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, and for a moment, she looked almost timeless. When she turned and saw him, surprise flickered in her eyes, then softened into a smile. "You came," she said quietly. "You invited me," he replied. "And you know I do not ignore contracts, even unwritten ones." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Still the lawyer, I see." "Still the teacher," he said. The children finished their practice, waving goodbye as they left the room. When the last one disappeared, silence filled the space. "You built something beautiful," he said, looking around. "It was not me," she replied. "It was all of them. I just gave them a place to begin." "That sounds familiar," he said. "It is what you did for me." Her gaze lingered on him, filled with pride and something warmer. "You look different," she said. "Older. Certain." "You look the same," he said, smiling. "Maybe even stronger." She walked to the window, watching the river glisten outside. "I used to think love was a distraction," she said. "Now I think it was the only real thing I ever had. Everything else fades." "Then maybe we were both wrong and right," he said. "You found peace. I found purpose. Maybe that is what love leaves behind." She turned back to him. "Do you still believe in contracts?" "Only the ones that cannot be broken," he said softly. She stepped closer, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed his. "You always did have the last word." "Not this time," he whispered. The afternoon light poured into the room, wrapping them both in gold. For a long moment, neither spoke. They did not need to. The years, the distance, the pain, they all folded into silence that felt like forgiveness. Outside, the sound of music drifted from another room, soft and imperfect, like a song still being written. Eleanor smiled. "Would you like to stay for the next class?" "I was hoping you would ask," he said. She handed him a violin and nodded toward an empty chair. As he sat beside her, their eyes met one last time before the music began, quiet at first, then fuller, stronger, alive. It was not a love reborn in youth but a peace found in truth. And for them, that was enough. Months passed again, and the music school grew into something larger than either of them had imagined. Mark stayed in Paris, helping Eleanor manage the foundation's legal affairs, though everyone there simply called him Monsieur Davis, the quiet lawyer who always smiles. Each morning began with the same gentle ritual: coffee by the window, the laughter of children filling the courtyard, and Eleanor walking through the hallways with a warmth that had once been hidden beneath layers of armor. The world had once seen her as a woman of steel, but here she had become something softer, something real. One evening, after a concert held by the students, Eleanor and Mark stood together by the river. The Eiffel Tower shimmered in the distance, reflected in the dark water. "They played beautifully tonight," Mark said. "They played with heart," she replied. "That is all I ever wanted for them." "And for yourself?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "For myself, I wanted peace. And maybe, a little forgiveness." "You have both," he said. "No," she said softly, looking at him. "I found them because you refused to give up on me." Mark hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "Before I came here," he said, "I stopped at a little shop near Montmartre. The man there told me that sometimes promises are worth renewing." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band. "This time," he said quietly, "no contracts. No signatures. Just choice." Eleanor's breath caught. "Mark," she whispered, "I am 72. And I am 24, he said with a smile. "Age does not scare me. Losing you again does." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she reached for his hand, her eyes shimmering with tears she did not try to hide. "You foolish, beautiful boy," she said, her voice breaking. "You make the impossible sound so easy." "That is because with you," he said, "it always was." The city lights flickered across the river as she nodded, closing the box and holding it against her chest. "Not tonight," she said softly. "But someday." He smiled. "Someday is enough." They stood there as the wind carried music from the open windows of the foundation behind them: violins, laughter, and the voices of children singing in harmony. Eleanor looked up at the sky, the stars reflected in her eyes. "When I met you," she said, "I thought I was saving you, but you were saving me." "No," he said. "We saved each other." Years later, people in Paris would still talk about the woman who turned her fortune into a haven for others and the young lawyer who never left her side. They never married officially again, but every morning, he placed a cup of tea beside her piano and whispered the same words. To love without contracts. It was a quiet promise, one that lasted the rest of their days. And when the final notes of their story faded, those who knew them said the same thing: that theirs was never a love story about age or wealth, but about two souls who met in the storm and chose, against all odds, to stay.